Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Anne-Caroline Tanguy. People call me AC, and I run marketing for AWS in France. And I'm with...
Hi, I'm Alicia. I'm a marketing specialist intern here in Virginia with AWS.
And we have the immense pleasure to be your room hosts today. So just a couple of housekeeping points. We have 2 exits on the left. The bathroom is on the left of that exit, just next door. I will ask you to be nice and turn off your phone or put it on mute. And if you haven't done it yet, download the app, the AWS Events app.
Yeah, it's the AWS Americas Events app. For iOS users, you can get it at the App Store. For Android users, you do have a link that you need to follow, but they're spread out throughout the venue, so make sure to check that out.
So, and now I let you with the session of Hyperscale security data for continuous risk monitoring. And I let you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, introduce yourselves.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I'm Steve Horvath. I've been with Telos 13 years. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Vision for the company. And while that sounds like a very lofty title, it doesn't really mean much. For the most part, I do a lot of interacting with customers, trying to understand where we're going to be taking our products and our services over the course of the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, and what kind of investments that we make to get to those goals, essentially.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amit Patel, and I work on the Exacta development team. So I work directly with our customers and our professional services who are on site to collect requirements and understand what do we need to build out for the future.
My name's Danielle Lauhoff. I'm one of the project managers for Telos. I'm on site at one of our largest customers with an enterprise deployment of our applications.
So we're going to do things a little bit differently than we typically do. Most folks who have come to a Telos presentation in the past, it's been very much geared toward features and functionality of what our product does. And while we're going to touch on those, this presentation really is going to be about how we listen to customers and the experiences that we have in Telos's 20 years, essentially, of deploying our Exacta product suite. So Exacta 360 is the latest instantiation of that, and our next generation product is Exacta.io. And Exacta.io is coming out general release in roughly the late September timeframe of this year. We're in beta right now, installed with customers, running pilots, gathering feedback, and continuing to refine it. And our conversation today is going to be a little bit more technically focused about what decisions we made, what technologies we had embraced, especially in the cloud, for deployments of customers to kind of ease some of the pain points we saw them dealing with over the course of the last 15, 20 years of deploying our product. And then just talking through all those different elements, really. And Amit is going to bring the business analyst perspective and let us understand a little bit of, like, as customers are making these requirements or are asking or showcasing these pain points, how do we take and internalize that, and how do we end up architecting and building out a solution that meets those requirements? And then Danielle is on-site, entrenched, essentially, at one of our largest FedCiv agencies that are enterprise-wide with multiple Exacta 360 and Exacta Continuum products. And so she's going to be able to say, on-site, this is kind of what we have been dealing with. These are some of the pain points, and this is why these new architectures and this new engineering effort came down the way it did. We're planning on leaving plenty of time for questions. So if you have questions, please hang out onto them until the end, and we'll try to go over those. And we also, the demo environment of our Exacta.io product is available at our booth. So the booth number will show up in a few minutes. I think it's 407. Mm-hmm. But please come by and stop by and check it out. It's very cool and interesting. So probably now almost 4 years ago, I received a phone call from a friend who went to work for AWS, and he said, what you guys have been doing, essentially within the intelligence community and the U.S. federal government, Department of Defense, I think we really could use at AWS, and together we would be a great solution. And that's been proven to be absolutely true. And when this phone call happened, we hadn't even really spelled cloud. I mean, we really hadn't embraced anything, really hadn't gone nose deep into it at all. It was very ancillary, but we became quick learners. We worked really hard with our compatriots at AWS, and we built an incredible partnership on the AWS public sector side. And we're very thankful for all the the time and energy that AWS devotes to us and helps us get to where we need to be, and we do a lot of work lobbying together and working together to bring about great solutions for customers. So that's kind of all there's to say about that. For those that don't know, Xacta, again, has been around for quite some time, and it's got three main elements to it. Originally launched in 2001 as WebCNA, Xacta 360 is the big brain, essentially. It's the piece that all the data ends up getting fed into. It's the place where we can regurgitate any type of audit document or any kind of body of evidence document, any kind of report that you kind of need to be able to showcase. And so Xacta 360 you can kind of think of as the brain that helps manage the risk management framework or whatever your compliance framework is. Continuum was originally something called continuous assessment back in 2005, and that was released as our way using an agent to be able to continuously validate IA controls that were technically testable. So you could write a script in a velocity scripting language, it would go on to the host, it would run a compliance validation check and report back the findings. And we brought that to bear to our customers, and we said, listen, you spend sometimes 2 years getting ready for this ATO, and you get your ATO, and by the next Microsoft Patch Tuesday, you're out of compliance. And they all went, yeah, but I don't have to worry for another 2 years and 8 months. And we're like, okay, that's not really the right attitude. Eventually, that has caught on now. We're all kind of aware of all the continuous monitoring and diagnostic programs that are going on, or just the concepts that keep coming up, ongoing authorization, ongoing ATOs, continuous ATOs. And again, we've been doing that for 15 years, roughly. And so Continuum is the latest instantiation of that capability where we can not just use an agent, but we can also take third-party software input via plugin, normalize that, map it all the way back to IA controls, and then report on that, automatically update your body of evidence, print out your SSP, all those kind of things. And then lastly, probably in 2011, I think, we were working with a 3-letter agency in Maryland. And they said one of the biggest problems that they were facing was that they could do the technical testing of controls. That wasn't really a problem. But somewhere around 70%, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the IA control set is non-technical test. They're interview-like questions. There are things like, do you have guards, gates, and guns? Do you have a disaster recovery plan? Do you actually test it annually? Do you have, whatever. And so we worked with them to build a campaign compliance manager, or compliance campaign manager, sorry. XCCM, we call it internally at Telos. And what that is essentially kind of a survey monkey on steroids. It gives us the ability to build using the SCAP language OSL. You build out a campaign set of questions. You can push them out to folks that are involved in a given program, and they can go and attest to the fact that they're meeting those controls, provide any evidence, and it all automatically gets sucked back into Xacta 360 and automatically updates your body of evidence and produces all those things. So that's just a little bit about the Xacta product suite. Now, this is what we're here to talk about, however, today. That's Xacta IO. So for the last 2.5 years, we've been building requirements, taking in requirements for the next generation of our product. And AWS has had a heavy influence on how we approach the cloud and new technologies in order to really embrace what you would call a next generation of functionalities within the product. And so what we're going to focus on for the rest of this talk is essentially what those drivers were, how we met them with new technology, new elements of the framework, and kind of the outcomes that we've seen already in beta testing and through our pilots. So it's really exciting to be talking about I/O. We announced that we were doing it last year at Public Sector Summit. We had, I think, every plan to be deployed and released at this point. But anybody who works in software will tell you that if we make September, we've done really well. It's not easy to get big moving software developed and deployed in a year. So first and foremost, the main driver, probably the #1 thing that we realized is that data security, security data, but security data in general, the volume of that is just growing exponentially. Not just to mention all the servers that are kind of multiplying and all the endpoints that are multiplying thanks to mobile and all the vulnerabilities that are multiplying thanks to red and white and black hat hackers. The reality is that that data set is not getting any smaller, and there is a real value in being able to take that data and draw analytics from it. But you have to be able to consume it, you have to be able to normalize it in a timely fashion, you have to be able to make heads or tails of it quickly. And so this was probably the #1 driver. I think Danielle's probably got some great experiences on site that she can share.
Absolutely. So my customer has 12 different components, what we call them, different agencies and directorates that all have to report their monthly compliance data, vulnerability data through our Continuum tool. And what we've learned on site is that that data grows exponentially, like you said, as more and more systems come online, as more and more agencies become operational. And so they were submitting on average over 800 gigabytes a month of vulnerability data and compliance data. And we were trying to process all of that as it's coming in, and it starts to cause a backlog, and it slows things down.
Yeah, indeed. And so from a MIT's perspective, this is one of those things we had to work very carefully with the customers on.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So the way we took all these use cases, we worked with our customers, and we looked at trends over time. So one of the things that we've seen is, as Steve has mentioned, as Danielle's talked about from the customer side, we've seen a growth in the amount of data that's processed. So what we've done is we've built a whole new connector framework. So we can actually take that data now, split it up, and process it in parallel. So to give you a live example of that, if you are doing vulnerability scans, for example, we allow you in our application to import multiple files, whether it's coming through a network share, it's a flat file, or an API. And our connector framework will take those files and process them in parallel so you don't have to go through a queue. And that does make it much more efficient and much faster.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. And some of the things that we made major changes on from a deployment perspective had to do with being able to allow for scalability. So to be ingestion of Hyperscale is one thing, but it's also the ability to take and deploy and be able to support large standing instantiations of large data sets as well. So the architecture that we've kind of settled on, I'll give you a little bit more about it, leverages Kubernetes pretty heavily, right? And containers and Kubernetes. But we're also really leveraging a lot of native AWS services. That helps us a lot with things like RDS from a Postgres perspective, and the Elk stack that AWS provides, and Redis, right?
Right.
Yeah, Redis also for cache.
Right.
So those elements of just the ability to kind of grab and take instead of having to stand up your own is just incredible from a time-saving perspective, from deployments and development even. Is there anything specific you guys want to share about that?
Nothing in particular. I think you touched on everything,
Yeah,
Steve.
great.
Yeah.
So the other thing that was a main driver for us was modularity. And modularity in this context is that we have a lot of customers that like specific elements of what our software does, but they may not love every whole piece. Some customers unilaterally use our product for POAM management. All they do. We do an exceptional job at helping with POAM management, tracking POAMs, milestones associated with POAMs, ownership responsibility of POAMs, for instance. And so we said, as we're going forward to architect this new solution inside of Xacta, what can we do to make it more modular so that folks are only installing or deploying or leveraging those things they really want to take and use for their use case, as opposed to having to deploy the whole system? And so, Amit, you want to give a little bit more details about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's exactly what Steve just talked about, right? So we have use cases where customers want to leverage certain functionalities within the application. So one of the long-term goals is Xacta.io will incorporate Xacta 360, Continuum, and XCCM. So all the different products that we have will be part of the Xacta suite. And with modularity comes the ability to pick and choose which suites you want to use, right? And in addition to that, if you are using a particular product set, I'm sort of mixing words here, within that product set, you'll be able to turn certain features on and off. So if it is POAM management that you're looking for, you can turn that feature on. In addition to that, we also looked at it from a development standpoint to see how can we make our process more efficient. Modularity helps us in the sense that we can now have both our developers working in the product. They can do a set or code something, pass it on, start working on the next thing, but then our quality assurance team can pick that up and start working on that other component of the application. So now you can have developers and QA simultaneously working in the application. And again, that comes down to efficiency and us being able to produce much more code, take in more customer requests, and build out our product.
Yeah, one of the pain points our customers have had to deal with over the course of the last few years, again, Xacta was originally written in, elements have obviously been updated over the course of the years, but originally written in 2000. Right, so the underlying frameworks are all, they operate differently, completely differently than what current new bleeding edge architectures and frameworks operate like. And one of the things that's been a bone of contention for years has been upgrades. And so modularity really helps with upgrades. Maybe
Yeah, absolutely. With the old architecture, you pretty much have to plan a whole weekend of downtime because you have to take time to do database backups and application backups and then run the actual upgrader, which is going to upgrade all of your database files individually and then upgrade the actual application. But so with this module approach, you can upgrade portions of the application as they get released instead of doing a whole weekend of downtime to upgrade the whole thing at once.
Yeah, and it's important to note that that's not every customer who would take a weekend, but that's more of like your major, very large scale instantiations of a deployment where you've got thousands and thousands of projects. A project is essentially an SSP. Thousands and thousands of projects and hundreds and hundreds of users, mostly a lot of concurrent users. So that's where you get some of that. We've had customers that toil over an upgrade over the weekend, and it's just been a major pain point for them. So the modular design really allows for the quality assurance to be a lot quicker, the upgrades to be a lot quicker, and allows us to start licensing in a way that reduces costs for your average everyday customer so that they don't have to buy the entire enterprise suite. They can buy elements that make sense for what they're doing and how they're doing the risk and compliance activities. And it also gives us the ability to add functionality without having to go touch the overarching code base. Like we can just add a new module that maybe deals with threat intelligence or add a new module that deals with a new capability. And those can be a lot more quickly developed now as a result of this framework and architecture. So one of the other elements is centralized content. And in the context of this discussion, centralized content really has a lot to do with how do you store things like NIST regulatory guidance or vulnerability data information. That's like the actual vulnerability library, library of vulnerabilities, things like that. Amit, you want to give a little bit of detail?
Yeah, I can. So the way our products are structured right now is a lot of our customers have to go through the process of, so let's say they're doing a regulation upgrade, for example. We used to be at a point where we had customers with 50 projects. They're well into the thousands now. So having to go into each of those projects and update the regulations for each of them is very time consuming. So by moving the content or centralizing it or moving it up to the enterprise, it allows us and our customers to do a regulation upgrade at the enterprise level and have it trickle down to all the projects. In addition to that, this also plays in with modularization because if we're able to combine all of our product sets into one suite, you're now managing content within a single suite as opposed to having to manage content in 3 different projects. So centralizing the content just has huge benefits for everyone.
Absolutely. And at my customer, they have a policy that they essentially treat as a regulation that gets updated on an annual basis. So we're annually having to push out this regulation upgrade to every single project. But having that centralized content in one source where we can make that upgrade is going to make the upgrades faster. It's going to make it quicker for everyone. They can start meeting that policy sooner.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the things that's difficult to, I showed 3 products earlier, Exacta 360, Exacta Continuum, and Exacta CCM. Well, as we built each one of those products all used their own format of, like, for say, a NIST for instance, a NIST regulation. That we're unifying under one NIST regulation in one format that all 3, going forward, the infrastructure will support one way of doing it, as opposed to having our content development team have to maintain a version of it for our XCCM product, a version of it for our 360 product, and a version of it for Continuum. That's just wholly inefficient. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense to consolidate that under one instantiation. Part of the reason for that, though, just to be clear, is that you can't just take a NIST regulation in XML format and pop it into a tool and expect it to be useful. There's a tremendous amount of content enrichment that happens by our content development team. That includes adding test procedures, that includes tagging data, doing all kinds of interesting things with that content in order to make things really move quickly and valuably. So we're going to do that still, but now we're going to unify the formats so that all of our product suite will have one specific format and we won't be wasting that energy any longer. Cloud agnostic deployments. Not much to say about this except for the fact that there's a real important reason to leverage Kubernetes and Docker, and that is not everybody deploys on AWS. I know that's hard to believe. We don't recommend you go with any other clouds, but the reality is that At the enterprise level, when you're a database of record, you've got customers that are going to want to deploy on, other cloud service providers. And we have to be able to support that, and we have to not just support it, but also excel at being able to operate in those environments, like with auto scaling and survivability and, being able to repair and deal with things. So this was one of those things that, as we broached the world of cloud, we had to kind of keep a careful eye on and understand as we go through with coding framework and doing things. It can't just be for one service provider. It's got to be something we can take and leverage across everything. So did you want to add anything?
Yeah, that's what Steve mentioned. That's exactly it. So we've had a lot of customers approach us, and they absolutely love AWS, but they do want to leverage other cloud services. So the technology that we have built behind our application is that it will make it a little easier for us and more efficient to go in and adopt those new cloud services if and when they're ready. Danielle, did you add anything from
well, I just mentioned that my customer, like I said, we have 12 different components which are almost independent of the main customer, and so they all have different policies and different procedures, and they deploy using different cloud models and different cloud providers, so we need to have different options for each of them.
Yeah, and it's really important to note that when we talk about deployments, we're not just talking about our exact software running in that environment. While that's obviously very important, being able to leverage, Docker and Kubernetes to do those kind of deployments, it's also about being able to reach into those environments and gather valuable data. So we can reach into other cloud service providers, we can reach into AWS, we leverage querying their APIs, being able to run compliance validation tests on there, understand how many resources are running in a specific account or a subscription, and then being able to bring that back and do the testing automatically from a technology validation perspective. So a lot of customers maintain our deployment of the product still on-prem, but we've coded and developed in such a way that you can take your on-prem instance and reach out into the APIs of either main cloud service provider and grab the relevant data, come back, be able to run compliance validations on an ongoing basis. So you can deploy in the cloud, you can deploy in a hybrid environment, you can deploy on-prem, and you get the same types of functionality, for the most part. You're not going to get auto scaling on an on-prem environment. You do lose a little bit, but you have those options. And some folks, when you're the database of record and you're storing all the vulnerability data, all the system information, all the system descriptions, all the names of users, who is allowed to be a part of what program, who's associated with program, especially when you're in more sensitive environments, they don't like the idea of that going anywhere except for inside of their castle protected by a moat, right? So cloud agnostic deployments is very important to our future. I think one of the other things that we've really embraced over the course of the last few years in leveraging AWS is we have to open our data to other customers, right? So when you talk about being a database of record, as we are throughout the U.S. intelligence community and a bunch of major FedCiv agencies and a lot of DoD elements, they have this treasure trove of information associated with information security and risk posture. And they want to take it and leverage it either through other systems or through analytics or through all kinds of things. And while we're building things like analytics into I/O, we realize that we've got to have simple ways for people to be able to put data securely and get data out of securely. And so we've spent a lot of time working on APIs. Do you want to touch on that a bit?
Yeah, definitely can. So as far as the APIs go, we do have open APIs. We have some standard documentation. So if a customer comes to us and they have a vendor that they want us to work with, we'd be able to do that. The other big thing with APIs is we've noticed that with Xacta.io, it is an asset and vulnerability management tool right now. And we realize that to get those scan files or those vulnerability scans into our application, there is some human intervention. So somebody would need to do the scanning on those machines. There'd be another person that needs to take those files, either import them into the application or put them in a network share so they can be pulled in, or an S3 bucket. And then there's somebody else who has to do the assessment. So if we can get rid of the piece where somebody has to take that file and put it into the application, that'd be great, and that'd be a big win. And that's exactly what the API does. So if Nessus is running a scan on your machine, the API is going to send that straight to Xacta.io 10 minutes later, for example. And then whoever's doing the assessment can start doing the work right away. So it takes out some of the human intervention, and it creates some automation there.
Absolutely, and that's one of the biggest problems that we face, is that just that manpower that's required for someone to run the scan, someone to then download the scan, send the scan, upload the scan. You know, if you only have one file, one system, it's not that big of a lift. But we have people who are managing 100 different systems. They're uploading 100 files, sometimes 200 files, and it takes a lot of time out of their day. And versus with the API, they can, like you said, focus on just going in, doing the analysis, running reports, reporting to whoever they need to do, and forget about that.
Right. And one of the other, sorry, just to add to that, one of the other things we've noticed is that it used to be that customers are running scans on a weekly basis or even a daily basis, but now they've come down to the hour. So if you're doing a scan every hour or every 2 hours, it's very difficult for somebody to take those files and put them into the application that often.
Yeah, for every customer that's running them at the hour, there's probably 100 that are running them quarterly. So I'm not sure if anybody else is doing that, but it's definitely one of those things that organizations, especially larger organizations, we have a commercial company that we're working with right now that has over 1 million assets, and they're just running their Qualys vulnerability scanner takes them 30 days, right? It's at least. So it's impressive to see how this data needs to be able to traverse and get to the right places really quickly, this large-scale data. And we're big fans, we're very bullish on APIs. Obviously, it just makes sense. We also have great partnerships with some of these other security products where we're working with them to also enhance some of their APIs so we get a little bit more granular data. If you think about it, vulnerability information is pretty static. We get a good idea of what systems are vulnerable to what things, but we can do a lot more, and we are doing a lot more with information we can glean from those third-party products. So we can actually query an API and find out if certain things are existing on disk, if there's other products installed, and we can start making assumptions and judgments about other IA controls based on that information. And some of that has to do with what we're doing with machine learning moving forward. So it's very interesting and exciting. What we're going to be able to let them, the systems do on their own is going to be fantastic. I have been at Telos for 13 years. I think I mentioned before, one of the #1 things I have heard in 13 years is you guys have got to do better visualizations and reporting. And we have tried over the years. It is not a simple thing. It's very hard to try and rack and stack data in a certain way that presents it to every customer the way they want to see it. Because every customer that I've ever deployed at, and I've probably deployed Xacta across 15 different enterprise customers, everybody wants to see their data chopped and moved slightly differently, just a little bit different. I only care about these vulnerabilities. I only care about these systems. I want to see these tags. I want to be able to do this. I want to just flip it this way, turn it this way, send it to me in an Excel spreadsheet, make it a PDF. It's always a little bit different. And so we spent a tremendous amount of time. Probably one of the things we spent, some of the larger lift for us was really focusing on how to make that data meaningful to organizations and individuals that were going to be working with it. And probably the best way to talk about that is
yeah. Yep. So we've realized that a lot of our customers, in addition to the type of data they want to see, they have different levels they want to see it at. So we have an enterprise level dashboard, and that's for an executive that's going in that wants to see across all my systems, what's my compliance of a particular system, or which system is vulnerable and which system has assets that are vulnerable, right? So you can do a mix of that at the enterprise level, but then there's some that want to drill down into a particular system, which is really your assessment boundary, and look at it from that perspective to see within that particular system, what are some of the specifics. So those are two types of views. Now, we've also created a third view, which is when you're on a particular page, and we'll see an example of that soon. When you're on a particular page, like the assets page, for example, is what we call in our application. If you're doing an import of scans, you have a list of all your assets. It could be well into the thousands. There's a lot of information that's on that page, and thank you, Steve. This is exactly it. We have what we call roll-ups at the top of the page, and what that's doing is it's raising a lot of information within that particular page now. So we have an enterprise level view, which was the initial slide that Steve had with the dashboard, then the system level overview, and then we go even deeper and give you a perspective of what's going on within that particular page with the data sets that you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, like Steve and I both said, reporting is one of the biggest things. It's almost on a daily basis. There's a new report. There's someone else asking for a new set of information. We're having to manually a lot of the times put this together because it is different from what another customer has asked for before. So with these reports and these widgets, it gives people really quick insight into the status of their system, and then it's going to be able to help them provide the reports to their management without having to go through me or my team or asking for some custom report to be built. They'll be able to do it themselves right in the tool.
Yeah, and it's important to note that I/O is built with this in mind, as opposed to Xacta360, where we've kind of shoehorned an executive level dashboard to try and make some data available to organizations and some of the folks working within the product to do the risk manager framework or whatever security compliance framework they're using. I/O is built to really focus a user's ability to go in and build widgets or leverage widgets and export widgets and have that data automatically refresh and have a few of them on the page. It's a completely different framework that allows us to do so much more from a visualization perspective. And I think that's really, really important to note. We've tried to meet the need over the years with Xacta360, just doing some sort of dashboarding for customers. This is a completely different animal. It allows us just a flexibility that's just unparalleled with what we've had in the past. And what's really important to note is that Xacta I/O will be able to take data from Xacta360 and provide data in those dashboards. So when you're running Xacta360 and you're running Xacta I/O, you're actually going to be able to make Xacta360 data available in your dashboard. So if you have things like, I want to know how many assessments I have supposed to be coming up this week, or I want to know how many systems, how many IA controls are failing in a specific project, you can create dashboards for each one of those, and you'll get them right. That data will come right from 360 and be available inside of I/O in that same exact dashboard. So we're adding that functionality and bringing it across all our product suite. So I think it's very important.
Just to add to that, Steve, so the other thing we looked at was we wanted to make sure that our application was very visual and very easy for new users coming in. So if you are a new user, we now have contextual help. So in the past, we had a field, we had an icon, you could click on it, get a simple description, right? But sometimes the description wasn't enough to tell you what needs to go into that field. So now with this new technology that we have, we're using something called Angular. And with that, we can not only have a description on that caption, but we can even have examples or images that will give you a much better idea of what needs to go into that field. In addition to that, we're also doing guided wizards. So if you're going through the process of doing an import or other parts in our application where you need help, where new users need help, we provide wizards to walk you through that process. And at any point, once you become an expert, you can turn it off and, of course, go to expert mode, where you can quickly punch in your data and move through your process.
Expert mode.
Yeah, that's what we're calling it.
So one of the things that you realize when you're starting to deal with these large data sets is that nobody wants to click 1,000 times when they're responsible for a system that's got 100 vulnerabilities times 10 systems, right? That just doesn't make any sense. How do you start making the machine do the work for you and being able to write simple logic rules or be able to make decisions across a large group of assets or a large group of information at one time? You want to give a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, bulk data management it's a huge issue. Like I was saying, my customer imports over 800 gigabytes a month, and they have over 300,000 operational assets that they're reporting: configuration data, vulnerability data, compliance data. And someone has to go in and they have to analyze all of this, make sure everything's been updated, make sure they're tracking all those vulnerabilities. They've reported what their management is expecting them to report on these scans, but making it easier for them where they can do it in bulk and they can select all of their assets at once that fit a certain category, and they can fix a false positive at once, or they can see who's failing a CVE really quickly. It's going to make their life a lot easier.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to that.
Right, and from that perspective, so working with Danielle and trying to understand some of those use cases, we've built in bulk data management anywhere in the application where it's possible. So if you are dealing with a lot of CVEs or tests or assets, there's a bulk way of handling that, whether you want to set a criticality on it, set the POC, any sort of management. In addition to that, we're also providing some different views. Because we're hyperscaling, we're taking in a lot of information, we need to provide our customers a way to be able to manage all that data. So in the past, we had views for, so you could look at a test, you could see all the test results that are associated to that asset. I'm sorry, you could look at an asset, look at all the test results associated to that asset. You could also look at it from a test result perspective, where if you do an analysis on that test, it's going to trickle down and affect an X number of assets. Now we're providing a CVE view, which is something that Danielle's particular customer is more interested in. And by looking at it from a CVE view, now you can affect hundreds of tests, which could ultimately affect hundreds of assets. So it's a way to manage that data from a very high level and have it trickle down.
Absolutely. So one of the last things I think we're going to touch on that was a main driver for us was advanced reporting. So again, we touched on it earlier, and we talked about visualizations, and that's the ability as you get into the system, you can start seeing things, up to the minute. It'll auto update for you, but there's also the need to be able to do reports. And so reporting has always been something customers kind of hammered us for in the past. And it's because, again, most folks, previously our reporting mechanism was canned reports. We didn't have any kind of ad hoc functionality for creating reports. And folks always want to see, well, I don't want to see this system criticality level, but I want to see this system impact level, or I want to see this instead of that. And those kind of changes required code changes. They were not, you couldn't just go select things and change them. They were actually hard-coded in our system. They had to be validated and changed, and so customers would be waiting for the next release or a patch release to get a simple change to some of the reporting. Exact.io, completely new direction. You want to talk about it?
Sure, so I can definitely speak to that. So as Steve mentioned, as a development shop, it became very difficult for us to manage all the different requests we were getting for customized reports, right? It could just be a simple field change, but it's still a development change or a code change for us. So we looked into ad hoc reporting, and all it really is, it's a way to use the GUI or the user interface, pull in a bunch of fields and build your custom report. So you no longer have to rely on knowing how to write SQL queries. You can do it directly through our application, and it allows you to build fully customized reports.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that almost all of our customers that deploy an enterprise capability end up leveraging like a Crystal or a Cognos to do this, right, Danielle?
Yeah, my customer utilizes Crystal to run a lot of their reports, or they come directly to me to run a database script from the back end in order to get to specific data. And it sort of ties into the bulk data management. A lot of the times
Absolutely.
we'll see, a new hot vulnerability was just found, and they want to know which assets is this application running on. And there's not really a quick way to do that right now, so you have to sort of manually run a report. But with the advanced reporting, it'll be really quick to say, I'm looking for this specific information on this specific asset or this system or this organization, and get that information right away without going through a help desk or waiting for Crystal reports to update.
Right, absolutely. Right. And so the last thing I think we'll touch on is that historically we've gotten a lot of organizations that have to do a lot with a little bit. Right, you're funded, especially if you're in the information security group or the compliance group or the under the authorizing official inside of the CISO group. You have to do a lot with a little, and a lot of that has to do also with the quality of the staff that you may have. Maybe not everybody's trained as well as we'd all like to believe they should be, the contracting staff or even whoever's involved. We've always taken the stance with 360, our Xacta product suite all across. We've taken the stance that we want to present as much help as we possibly can. So we have this, as Amit brought up earlier, we have contextually based help throughout our entire product, and a lot of customers, as an enterprise customer, go in and really customize that help for their specific environments, making sure that if you need to understand something, you click on help. But we've tried to take that up a notch in Xacta.io. So not only are we going to have contextually based help, but we really have focused on really simple wizards. And we talked about expert mode. You can turn it all off. You don't want to see it. You're tired. You understand how to do it. It's easy. Turn on expert mode. Then you don't get the wizard flashing up and asking you to make kind of the simple steps. But when you're pushing this out in an enterprise capacity across 30,000 users, potentially, you've got to be able to have some help, some CBTs available. Make it as simple and easy and intuitive as possible. And that's been a major key tenet driver as we've done what we're doing with I/O and getting ready to release it here in September.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of high turnover with our user base, and as much as we try to train everyone, we have monthly training, we have user guides, sometimes it's just not enough because you just can't get to them quick enough because the turnover is so fast. But with these guided helps, then they can do it themselves, they can figure it out, they can understand what everything is for, what they're doing. And then, like you said, once they become an expert at it, if they're importing, a lot of files each month, or they're doing the same analysis each month, they can turn off that wizard and go into the expert mode and save a lot of time not having to click through what they already know.
Yeah. Anything to add, Amit?
The only thing I'll add is the user guides are extremely difficult to go through. Our Xacta 360 guide is well into the thousands, right, when it comes to pages. So having these wizards is huge for our customers. In addition to that, the only other thing that we have talked about doing down the road is having online help. And that help, instead of having to go to a particular manual in the application and trying to dig through that dig through the manual and do a Control F, right? it can give you, through the online help, if you do a search on a particular field or something that you're looking in the application, it'll query all that stuff and give you help for those specific areas. So it's a very customized help, and it's giving you the information that you need as opposed to forcing you to dig through that entire documentation set.
Yeah, so the last thing I'll say is that this product is not a slideshow. It's actually real. It's at our booth right now. You can go see it, taste it, touch it, smell it, whatever you like to do. It's not just some demo environment. It's actually running live. We're running it in pilots. We're working with customers right now and generating feedback. And so stop by and take a look at it. I think it's booth 407. It's a giant Tello sign and a bunch of screens, and we'd be happy to showcase it and talk about it. So with that, I think we have reached about 10 minutes left. We'll take some questions from anybody that'd like to venture a question.
Hi. Have you guys done anything in Exacta.io with artifact management? So the artifact section that's currently in 360,
Sure.
There's no folders or no ability to really see what's going on. It's just kind of like throw all your documents, throw all of your attachments, et cetera.
Yeah, so I'll let Amit answer that, but I'll codicil the answer with just letting you know that functionally wise, Exacta.io is starting by replacing capabilities in Exacta Continuum. And so initially out the bat, it's very focused on vulnerability and asset management for the most part. So artifact management doesn't play in as largely as it would play in when you start talking about risk management framework, body of evidence documents, audit reports, things like that. So I'm not sure if that piece is made at the beginning into this.
No, you're absolutely right, Steve. So right now, it is an asset and vulnerability management tool. So Exacta.io is a continuous monitoring aspect of the entire RMF process, right? So if you are using both products, you can use IO to do all your vulnerability management, feed that information back to 360, which is our core product, and then you can produce all those artifacts and documentation through it.
Yeah, but artifacts is something that I hear a lot about from my customer too. You know, when they might have 1,000 artifacts and they're like, I'm just trying to find this one document, where is it? So that's definitely something when we start integrating the Exacta 360, those features, that functionality, I think we'll definitely work really closely with my customer and other customers and truly understand the best layout, maybe folders, maybe more searchable to make sure that those artifacts are readily available. Yeah, it's important to note that unlike most organizations, I don't think I've ever seen a company more driven by customer desire and demand. Like as we go forward, we have something called an advisory council that meets roughly 3 to 4 times a year, and we get a lot of feedback from our customers. We use that to make a lot of judgments and decisions. And there's every intention as we move forward with the new framework to start taking modules from the 360 application over the course of the next 3 years and replicating and enhancing those capabilities within the IO framework. And so I'm sure artifact management is one of those things that'll get a pretty heavy weight associated with it from a priority perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you for the question. Anybody else? No other brave souls?
Any other question?
By all means.
Go ahead, sure.
We've got 7.5 minutes.
I used to train Exacta at a customer site, so
Awesome.
I have a lot of questions. So one of the other questions I had was for the visualizations. So the visualizations are going to be a part of Exacta.io. Are those visuals that, I can't talk. That was one word that I could never say. I can't say it, but is that going to be a separate module or is that going to be baked in?
Visualizations will be baked into the IO deployment as it launches in GA.
It won't be a separate module that you have to purchase.
No, and as you add modules to it, you'll be able to get new widgets for each of those. So as you add X360 to it or XCCM to it, you'll be able to add those widgets to your dashboard. And each user can customize that dashboard and customize the widgets to their own system or their own org to focus on what's most important to them.
You can think of modules as being more like core functionalities, like asset and vulnerability management, risk management framework, workflow, document reproduction, audit management, things like that. So it's modules. We have because we started with this one, and it encompasses the framework. There are elements of it that are underlying framework, and there are elements of it that are essentially modules for functionalities or capabilities. And I believe we'll draw boxes around those functionalities and capabilities, and that's how we'll license in the future. But we're kind of TBD on some of that as of right now.
And another question was just on licensing. So a lot of the current deployments, at least in the IC community, are a lot of those customers already purchasing an IO? How is that going to work as far as enterprise licensing?
That's a great question. So Exacta IO will, if you are an Exacta Continuum customer and you are Enterprise Exacta Continuum, you will be getting Exacta IO for free. It conveys immediately. It's our next generation product, and it's essentially treated as an upgrade. And obviously, if you're a current customer and you are just a 360 customer, but you're very interested in some of those functionalities, we are always working with organizations to make sure they're getting what they need. So we'll be very...
Okay, thanks. I'll give up
So,
the...
I'm sorry, can I just go back to your previous question? There's one other thing I wanted to add. So right now, for GA, we are working on a dashboard in IO, and it would be a 360 dashboard. So we are going to have widgets that can have an API, go to 360, collect that data, bring it back, and then present that 360 data in IO. So even though we won't have that functionality there, we will have the widgets there to present that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for all the questions. Last chance for anybody else. No other brave souls? One thing I'd like to leave everybody with is that we're also doing a lot with FedRAMP. We see FedRAMP as a major hurdle for a lot of ISVs that are trying to get through that FedRAMP process, that want to offer their products and services to the federal government. You can stop by our booth and talk a little bit about our partnership with Rackspace. We have a great partnership going on where we're hosting something called the Risk Workshops and a whole program to get you through FedRAMP. So thanks for your time, everybody, and thank you guys for the panel.
Thank you.
Well,